Give a man pleasure, and he'll forget his goal. Give a man pain, and the beast within him will conquer the world. These two truths, as ancient as the earliest epic etched into clay, and as contemporary as the pulse behind a billionaire's burnout, have quietly governed the architecture of every civilization, every empire, every domestic revolt against mediocrity. For while pleasure may momentarily cradle a man in the illusion that he has arrived, it is pain that unsheathes the deeper impulse, the primal, almost sacred compulsion to transcend, to disrupt, to achieve something that echoes after death. Pleasure, for all its luster, is often the silk that blinds. Pain, the blade that carves clarity into the soul. Pleasure, that beguiling siren swathed in velvet and vapor, does not announce itself as the enemy of purpose. Instead, it nestles itself within the folds of our dreams, slowly supplanting them with softer, easier replicas until we awaken one day, content perhaps but hollow. The ancients, who knew a thing or two about decadence and downfall, rarely praised unearned joy. The Lotus Eaters, narcotized into forgetting home, or Circe's guests, devolved into swine, serve as enduring metaphors for what happens when a man gorges on gratification and forgets the task he once burned to complete. In nearly every spiritual tradition worth its salt, from the austere wisdom of the Stoics to the intricate psychology of the Upanishads, pleasure unmoored from purpose is not a gift, but a gilded trap. And yet, the modern world, which is restless, slick, and neurotically optimized for convenience, has become a cathedral of perpetual pleasure, where pain is treated not as a rite of passage, but as a glitch in the system to be medicated, minimized, or masked with filters. Today's man is enticed not with the promise of heaven or legacy, but with high-speed Wi-Fi, curated experiences, and the seductive hum of algorithmically engineered affirmation. The tragedy would not be that we are surrounded by delight, but that it comes unearned, uninterrupted, and unexamined, leaving our will flabby and our desires confused, a generation drunk on dopamine, wandering aimlessly through the aisles of synthetic Eden. Conversely, pain, that indelicate instructor, often cloaked in cruelty, rarely flatters but always instructs. It arrives uninvited, unrelenting, and almost always at a moment of great inconvenience. But in doing so, it scours the soul of illusion and reintroduces man to his elemental self, that creature not yet anesthetized by civility or social scripts. Whether it is the anguish of exile, the devastation of loss, or the slow decline of existential dread, pain rarely leaves a man as it found him. More often than not, it chisels away his pretenses, his inherited delusions, and his cowardly evasions until only the essentials remain: faith, fury, or the fertile silence that precedes reinvention. The human psyche, shaped as much by what it fears as by what it longs for, has always found deeper narrative integrity in tales of agony than in lullabies of ease. Sisyphus, Prometheus, Antigone. These mythic figures endure because of their trials, not because of their triumphs. They speak to that ancient recognition, buried deep in the marrow, that to suffer consciously is to forge something eternal. Pleasure may preserve, pain transmutes. One embalms, the other resurrects. And therein lies the magic. The most radiant human creations, from Van Gogh's starry vortices to Beethoven's defiant symphonies, were born in the crucible of torment, not in the lap of luxury. Pleasure, when it is gratuitous, often comes at the cost of depth. It is a currency borrowed from the future, spent in the present, and paid back, often with interest, in regret. Pain, by contrast, is the debt we inherit from the past, ancestral traumas encoded in flesh, inherited anxieties that pulse beneath our conscious choices, and the quiet burden of being the surviving link in an unbroken chain of endurance. To suffer well, then, is not simply to feel, any beast can feel, but to metabolize that suffering into meaning, into movement, into art, into a form of revolt so subtle and sacred it escapes commodification. And yet, to denounce pleasure wholesale is to mistake the medicine for the malady. While pain may instruct and ignite, it cannot sustain. The man who lives only for his trials becomes brittle, a martyr to meaning without a taste for life. For pleasure, when rightly timed and rightly earned, reminds us why we fight. What sweetness there is in reprieve, what melodies still hum within the human body even after it has broken. It is the wine after the war, the warm thigh beneath the winter sheet, the sudden laughter that breaks the solemnity of grief like a sunbeam through stained glass. To dismiss pleasure entirely is to reject half of life's grammar. We require both, pleasure and pain, as partners in an intricate, irreducible dance, one that stretches across centuries and civilizations, across cathedrals and battlefields, across lullabies and laments. Pain builds the stage, but pleasure lights it. Pain deepens the well, but pleasure is the water we drink. The illusion is that these forces exist in opposition. The truth is that they complete each other. Without pleasure, pain becomes nihilistic. Without pain, pleasure becomes insipid. Together, they sketch the full human arc, from the first wail of birth to the last sigh of death, with all the sacred contradictions in between. And in truth, some of the brightest human lives are those who have managed not to alternate between these poles, but to integrate them, to let joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy inhabit the same room without one needing to evict the other. The poet who bleeds through his verse and still dances at weddings, the woman who weeps at dusk and still plants flowers at dawn, the mother who bears unbearable losses and yet sings lullabies into the dark. These are the symphonies of human complexity. They do not privilege one note over the other. They orchestrate the full scale. Pain, when embraced with eyes open and ego cracked, sharpens our sense of the real. It strips away the scaffolding of trivial pursuits and exposes the bedrock of our beliefs. A man in pain does not care for small talk, for status games, for the choreography of shallow pleasantries. He speaks, instead, in elemental terms. Love, loss, loyalty, God. Pain reduces the world, not in meaning, but in distraction. It teaches us to walk barefoot again on the terrain of the sacred. And still, we persist in this modern campaign to banish discomfort from the human condition. We drug it, silence it, rebrand it as trauma in the pejorative sense, rather than as the crucible of transformation. We've pathologized grief, professionalized joy, and outsourced wisdom to content creators. In this sanitized landscape, pain becomes taboo and pleasure becomes plastic. But no synthetic joy will ever replace the pleasure that arises after pain has been faced, endured, and transfigured. That kind of pleasure does not dull the spirit. No, it awakens it. History itself is proof that it is not the contented, but the restless, not the safe, but the scarred, who move humanity forward. From Mandela to Malala, from Dante to Dickinson, the most enduring contributions haven't come from those who avoided suffering, but from those who interrogated it, distilled it, and offered it back to us as scripture, song, and science. Pain, when given voice, becomes testimony, and testimony, when true, becomes torchlight for those still wandering. Civilizations that idolize comfort calcify, while those forged in fire tend to leave behind cathedrals, cannons, and constellations of meaning. Rome rotted in its own opulence. Sparta still echoes in every tale of discipline. If pleasure makes a man complacent, pain, when harnessed, makes him mythic. It is pain that cracks open the shell of habit and releases the primordial instinct to become something other than what the world expected. And beyond even the historical and psychological, there is a spiritual dimension to this duality that cannot be ignored. The mystic traditions, Christian, Sufi, Kabbalistic, Zen, each in their own symbolic vocabulary, recognize that to encounter the divine is to pass through fire, but also to emerge wrapped in light. Pain initiates, pleasure confirms. Pain cracks the ego, pleasure floods the wound with grace. One prepares the soul, the other proves that the soul, despite all, can still sing. So yes, give a man pleasure, and he may forget the mountain he swore to climb, trading his boots for slippers and his map for a mirror. But give him pain, raw, searing, inescapable, and you may awaken the beast, not the brutish one, but the sacred beast, the builder of bridges and breaker of chains, the creature capable of remembering why he was born. He will conquer the world, not through violence, but through vision, shaped by ache, crowned by ecstasy, and finally, fully alive. And perhaps that is the finest paradox of the human condition, that our highest potential is unlocked not by the avoidance of suffering or the overindulgence in joy, but by the orchestration of both, played like chords in a fugue, whose beauty lies in its tension. The man who fears pain will flee greatness. The man who flees pleasure will forget beauty. But the man who welcomes both, who dances with the wound and the wonder alike, he becomes a force to reckon with, a force to remember.